So an amazing topic around diversity and performance to kick off this session this morning. A really remarkable panel who, thanks to the delay, I had the privilege of spending even more time with than I would have otherwise. I think that for different industries and for different organizations, diversity means different things. And so I think to start off, I'd like to ask the panel one question that we can address from left to right here. What's the value of diversity in your respective organizations, and how do you think diversity impacts the businesses you represent? And Teresa, we can start with you.
I mean, I think that diversity allows you, if you focus on it internal to the company, it gives you a little bit of an insight into what your customers might be thinking. And I think as we look at the demographics, particularly for the United States, I think that connection is important. And I guess the other thing that just is a personal value is if we want our employees to be engaged, then I think that making each person feel like that there's a level playing field and a fair pathway for them that's viable, I think is very, very important.
Great, Kelly.
So I am with Visa, which is a payments company. And when you think about diversity, we're basically a combination of financial services and technology. Not really the best performing areas for diversity, certainly historically. But for us, it's very, very important. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're all about innovation. We're all about payments, digital payments, e-commerce, and our future is all about innovation. And the research shows that the most innovative teams are the most diverse teams. And so we have to focus on diversity. It's imperative for us. Secondly, the foundation of our organization is about talent. It's about people. And, I am the executive sponsor of the Women's Network at Visa, and we spend a lot of time talking about having a diverse and inclusive organization. And, the way I talk about it, you think about, when you work with a team that has different points of view, but you feel really welcome to be at that table, to have a voice, to participate, to build together, there is no better feeling than that. That's a high-performing team. That's a diverse and inclusive team, and that's what we're focused on building.
That's great. Suzanne?
Great. So I am at United States Steel, and we're 116 years old, and not necessarily an industry that has been known for its commitment to and focus on diversity. That being said, in the past 3 years, under the leadership of our CEO, Mario Longhi, we have made a very serious commitment to diversifying our workforce, and it's diversity in all levels, gender, race, sexual orientation, as well as diversity of thought and diversity of experience, because as you can imagine, with these companies that have been around for more than 100 years. People hire in their own likeness, and they hire people from the same backgrounds, and so we didn't necessarily have the diversity that we needed going forward. We're in the midst of a major transformation, so diversity of experience also became very, very important to our company. So I think we've made great progress in the past 3 years.
That's great. And Teresa, to start this with you, and I'd like to sort of, by way of giving you an opportunity to introduce your background, both as a CEO and as a board member, as you think about how boards can influence diversity initiatives and the responsibility that boards have, would love to get your perspective there, and if you could also share a little bit about your background, both in a CEO role and on boards. Sure,
thanks. So maybe I'll just start a little bit with my background. I was the CFO of the United States Treasury Department from 2001 to 2004, and then I went to Wall Street, and I was at UBS Securities. I was the CEO of UBS Securities for about 5 or 6 years. Now I serve on the ON Semiconductor board, and we're honored to be one of the most ethical companies. I'm also on the board of Invesco Funds, which is the mutual fund part of the mutual fund family. In terms of diversity, I start with the premise that diversity of thought is important. When you think about mistakes or errors that you make in judgment, it's usually because you thought of a premise that we all thought was correct, and then it turned out to be incorrect. And I think that the way that you can avoid that, I'm an engineer by training. I started out as a nuclear test engineer at General Dynamics before I went to business school. And I think that, the diversity of thought is incredibly important. And I mean, that's the part of diversity that really makes me tick. Because I think that enriches the conversation and it makes people think about different things. And I think we've all understood in the last maybe 10 to 15 years that there are many things we thought were known, whether it's the financial crisis and liquidity or issues around anti-terrorism. There are a number of issues that we thought were very causational, and those proved to be not necessarily correct. And so I think that a diverse group of people at the boardroom, particularly geographic diversity. At On Semiconductor, we have one member who's European, he's based in Europe, another member who's in Japan. And I think that those markets are very different from our markets. And having that diversity of just location, boots on the ground that give you a different perspective is also incredibly important. And then the last component would be, we were just talking as panelists, when you look at prospective employees, when you're interviewing for a job, very few people are motivated by hearing about the previous candidate. I mean, they want the job. The candidate who's interviewing with you wants the job, but they really don't want to hear at length every single thing that you liked about the person who has left. They'd really like it to be about them. And I was shocked at some conversations from my kids who are all college-age kids around their internships and what was interesting to them. And I think that this generation of employees is just so exciting, and a generation of potential employees. College grads now are 56% women. Law schools are more than half women. Medical schools are more than half women. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. But some, as you pointed out, Preston, some of that starts in the boardroom with representation. And it's also a responsibility. It's a responsibility to ask good questions, and it's a responsibility to be respectful.
And one of the themes that we touched on just to piggyback on that, was it's certainly you can have board representation, you can have a diverse board, but that may not be sufficient, nor may they, in all cases, carry in sort of that as an agenda or an initiative for that to influence the diversity of the businesses that they're supporting.
I mean, I've seen it cut both ways. I mean, I've seen candidates who join a board or join a company in a particular position, and you would have thought that there would have been a little bit maybe more compassion and interest for others. I mean, I was very lucky at one point to meet Arthur Ashe in 1984 when I was in college, and I just was struck by his and his book is one of my favorite books in the whole world. It's called Days of Grace. And his comment has always been a manifestation of something I want to be, which is, you make your living by what you get, but you can change lives with what you give. And I think that we all have that responsibility when you're on a board to really make a difference to other people, to do mentoring, to make sure that the slates are diverse, to make sure that you give someone else an opportunity. And then the last thing is when someone gives you a chance to do really well and to keep in touch with them. And I mean, my first boss who gave me a chance, I was the only woman that was hired in nuclear power at the time. And eventually we hired other women when I was still there. But it always takes someone to be brave to make that decision, and we need to be thankful for that and really do a good job to show our appreciation, even if you think it's deserved.
Would like to stay with you for a minute and talk about the banking and finance industry, which you have a lot of expertise and experience in. When we'll talk to Suzanne in a minute about the steel industry and its historical relationship with diversity and initiatives and how there's a different mountain to climb there. I think that in banking and finance, there's been, maybe by the construct or design of the industry itself, has been more predisposed to having more diverse candidates and just a more diverse landscape. Can you talk a little bit about how you see banking and finance and its relationship to diversity?
Well, I mean, I would say that if you look at banking in the last maybe 5 years, especially post-crisis, which I guess is 8 years, there are a number of really successful women in banking and finance, and they're coming out. I would say most of us played competitive sports at some level. Not all, but many of us did. And I thought that the environment of Wall Street is very competitive, and I thought that was a good thing. I've talked to a lot of other women to ask them, why did you pick this industry? I didn't start out in finance. I moved into finance after a period of time in my career. Actually, I was a chief compliance officer for Kaiser Permanente, which I loved. I loved that role. Of all of the roles that I've ever done, that was actually my favorite role. But when I talk to people that are in finance, I think that the competition and the fact that the financial industry gives you a scoreboard, to make an Olympics analogy, I'd rather be competing in swimming than in gymnastics. This 5-panel judge thing in gymnastics, wasn't really a fan of that, whereas swimming seemed a little bit more binary. There's a touchpad. I think most people that are in finance like the scoreboard component as opposed to the 5 panelists of judges with the subjective criteria. Didn't really do a whole lot for me. But that's, I think the biggest thing is that people women who wanted to do it liked the score. They liked the fact that it had milestones and that you didn't have to have a 10-year body of work to be evaluated. When I talked to young women that were in our internship program, they liked the scoreboard component. They liked the fact that there were quarterly earnings and there were quarterly reports and that you had interim milestones to know whether you got it right or not, and that you didn't have to sit there and, quote, wait your turn, for 7 to 15 years until someone moved on and you need to take their seat. The meritocracy part of Wall Street is very appealing.
Right, that's great. We talked also this morning a bit about State Street and the move to potentially vote against companies that don't have a defined diversity program. As someone who's sitting on 3 boards now, what do you have, any advice for the folks in the audience around how to effectively disclose company strategies on diversity, irrespective of whether or not you're compelled to do so?
Well, I mean, I know that a number of people that are in the corporate secretarial role, the corporate general counsel role, and the legal role, those roles are very important for board members. In some cases, you interact with that function quite a bit. And so I would say that for those of you that feel like you have influence, make sure that your board slates are diverse for board candidates. I think that that's a great opportunity. And I think that those board members that join will then be able to, most of the people that join will then be able to be supporters of the legal and compliance function. And, as a former chief compliance officer, you can never have enough early requests for advice from a legal perspective. Earlier is better than later. So that's one kind of hint. In terms of what State Street's looking for, I mean, in theory, they should be looking for diverse representation at the board level, and you would hope that that would then translate into diversity at the corporate level. Unfortunately, some of the statistics are not as strong as we would like them to be. Although I had heard in the last 12 months, it does look like there is a significantly higher portion of women on new boards than the portion of women on overall boards. So that would suggest that we're getting some traction in the last 12 months. I guess you could argue that a bunch of different ways. State Street, I think, is asking a lot of good questions. One question that should come up is age representation in the boardroom. I think if you're a technology company, you really need representation of people who are in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. I think that some diversity of age is incredibly important at the board level.
That's great. Thank you. Kelly. Similar, sort of by way of introduction, would like to, you have a rich history working for global organizations. You obviously have You've seen different diversity initiatives, and you've also seen the landscape of diversity change over time, whether it was at PepsiCo to now at Visa. So I'd love to sort of both hear your background and how you've seen diversity change as different initiatives at different global organizations.
Sure. Reflecting back, I guess in a couple months I'll be going to my 25th law school anniversary, graduation anniversary with all my buddies. And thinking back on what it was like 25 years ago, coming out of law school and joining a law firm. And I remember at that point, I remember thinking this is so weird, but they said when I joined the firm, women could wear pants. Like they made a rule change. We could wear pants to work. How weird is that? I mean, who cares what you wear? Anyway, that was 25 years ago. I started a law firm, and then I went in-house pretty early in my career. I joined PepsiCo at the Frito-Lay division in Dallas in 1996 as a trademark lawyer at the time to handle the global brands, which was a great job. Another weird fact, going back then, believe it or not, to go in-house from a law firm, corporate paid more. And they said you worked less. That was a lie, but they actually paid, at the time, things were different. And it was a great company. So talk about a rich history of focus on diversity, inclusion. I mean, I started going through inclusion training in the early 2000s, and not just lip service, do a little bit of online training. It was like go off-site and spend days focusing on how to have a diverse group of people work at really high levels of inclusiveness, which was terrific. When I was at Frito, and I became the general counsel of Frito-Lay after a couple years, and I became the executive sponsor of women of color in that organization, which was also a terrific experience for me to grow as a leader and to really understand what it meant for folks who were different. And I have great relationships with the women I worked with back then to this day, and we've all moved into different directions. I was at Frito for a while, and then I had another opportunity in PepsiCo, and I ended up having an overseas opportunity, which is also a great thing for your experience when you think about diversity and inclusion. I ended up moving to Dubai to lead the Asia, Middle East, Africa division of the company, which meant working in China and India, Egypt, South Africa, over to Australia, up to Japan. Talk about having to figure things out very quickly. I was fairly junior and the only woman in a role like that in the organization, and having to figure out very quickly how to lead a senior person in China versus a senior person in India versus a senior person in Egypt, all having very different backgrounds, all looking very different to myself, and how to motivate their performance. Huge learning experience for me, and just interesting for the first time to be the one out on the team, the white female who didn't look or fit in with anybody else. A great experience, and came back to the US after a couple of years and worked in corporate before I joined Visa. But Pepsi just has a really rich history, and my friends from Pepsi are here. Hey guys. That team's a big part of it, of really focusing on diversity and inclusion. Visa, which I joined 3 years ago as the general counsel, a different journey. It was an association model for a very long time, going back over 50 years, but as a public company, it's sort of a baby, right? Went public in 2008 in the US. And so whereas at PepsiCo, in the dialogue, part of everything that we did, a little bit different at Visa. And when I joined, we hired a chief diversity officer for the first time under Charlie Sharp's leadership, really focused on it, put programs into place. But we have, I think, a very good track record given the industry that we're in. Our board has had, since I joined, 3 terrific women who are really focused on diversity and inclusion, and you feel it down into the organization. The CEO, from Charlie, now Al Kelly, who's become our CEO, really focused on it. And our executive committee, for example, is 30% women. Our senior ranks, meaning VP, senior VP, and above, 30%. My own team is very diverse in legal and compliance on a global basis, with 60% women, 40% women VP and above, and my own direct reports are 40% female right now. I have an open position, FYI. We'll see what happens with that. Maybe another great woman on the team. But a lot of focus on in the organization. Again, in an industry, though, when we look at technology and we look at a lot of our workforce, so we're around 15,000 people, but probably a good 10,000 of them are technology folks, because we are basically, we run software and we connect to the financial institutions for payments. And so that's where we focus. And when we look at the candidates, when it comes to the technology positions, it's not as easy to find the right folks who are diverse. And so a lot of focus in our organization, not just on our own talent and growing and putting in the right roles, but also looking at influencing and impacting education to get women into STEM so that we can have access to more diverse candidates when it comes to technology positions.
Yeah, it's interesting because I tie that back to also the notion of, more than 50% of law school is now female, and sort of
graduate school.
The future candidates that we want to be able to hire has, for those roles that require a professional degree, et cetera, there certainly needs to be the population that can support and sustain that. Visa, technology company. EverFi is obviously a technology company, and there's STEM, like there's these other implications as it relates to hiring. Would love to focus on the relationship between how you think about, obviously we talked about it in the financial and banking realm. When you think about diversity in technology, what do you see there?
Well, and so that's a global issue too, right? We tend to bring ourselves back to the United States a lot of times when we're talking about this topic, but it is a global issue, but it's different everywhere. So, for example, we opened up a big innovation center in India, in Bangalore, which is terrific. And then we set to hire qualified people in India, and we really focused on bringing in great women into those positions. And I'm happy to say that in the first round, when we hire folks, we're talking about 1,000 people, 25% of the hires were women in that organization, which is great, right? But it can't stop there. It can't be just about getting the women in. Then we have to figure out how we create an environment where they can be very, very successful. And so there's a lot of focus there. Back in the US, we look at programs, particularly for diverse talent, and we're just putting a lot of energy. We're working with Berkeley and other organizations, Simmons College, to put programs into place to enable people. But I think probably the most important thing that we do at Visa is talk about it constantly. And that comes, we talk about, particularly in our legal and compliance roles, tone at the top is so important. So I talked about our board having amazing women on it in particular. But at the CEO, ex-com level, just constantly bringing our conversation back to talent and making sure that we have diverse representation, not just throughout the organization, but at the very highest levels of the organization. And you have to force that topic in all of your meetings. And that's a role that some of us play. We have a committee that focuses on this, and it's constantly about, let's think about that. Wait, that's an open role, that's a new way of looking at things. Who are we gonna put in that position, and why, and how do we enable their success? Part of the conversation in every meeting that we have.
Continuing with the theme of diverse representation, obviously Visa's huge employer. As general counsel, you were invariably engaging with a lot of outside counsel, of which there are probably many in this room. Does diversity play into that criteria when you're looking for outside counsel?
Yeah, absolutely. So you start with yourself. You focus on your own house first, and I feel like we've done a good job when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the legal and compliance function at Visa. But you immediately start to think about all the law firms out there, and I've said this publicly before, I'll say it again, law firms stink at this. They're not very good at diversity and inclusion. The environment is an unhealthy place for that. And so what we can do, especially when you come from an organization where you've just been steeped in it for so long, and the focus on it to make sure that people are included and make sure you're really thinking about it in the right way, we can work with law firms to help. And so what we have done is instituted a program where we send out questionnaires, we talk to our law firms, we get information from them about their diverse teams that are working on our cases. I work at Visa, we have massive litigation, you may have heard about it. And so we're spending some money on firms, and you know what? We have the power of the purse. And so we work with the firms to talk about diversity and to require that they talk to us about it, And then I'm using a carrot approach right now, which is if you do really well and show me that you've got diverse teams working on my matters, then there's reward. There's come in, get more work. We do a big celebration every year. We have a dinner. We spend time together. And I'm much more likely, or my team is much more likely to pick those firms that are performing well when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Other folks are taking more of a stick approach, and it's kind of like, you're not diverse enough, I'm going to cut your fees. I'm going to take harsher measures with you, which is a different approach. I haven't gone that route yet. So far, I'm using the carrot approach, and it helps. It really does help. But all of you law firm people out there, you got to do better with this, and it matters to us. It matters to me as a leader of Visa and as a leader of the legal field that we do better when it comes to diversity. And not just talking about women. We talk a lot about women, but people of color of all differences and backgrounds as well.
That's great. Suzanne, we've looked at diversity through the lens of banking and finance, through tech. I think that the general consensus is that steel probably isn't at the leading, historically has not been front and center on diversity initiatives. Would love to keep the format going, would love to hear some of your history in the steel industry and then sort of how you see diversity within the industry and at US Steel specifically.
Sure. Great. So I've actually had the interesting experience of working in some of the most diverse organizations and some of the least diverse. So I previously have worked at the World Bank. I also have UN experience. And then on the flip side of that, I'm working in the steel industry, which historically has not been as diverse. I also worked for a company, Academy, and helping to turn that company around, which was Blackwater, which by the very nature of what they do is not that diverse. And I also, Kelly and I have perhaps crossed paths. I also worked in the Middle East, and I worked for the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And in that sense, it wasn't diverse in that I was one of the only women in a role there, and certainly one of the only Americans at the time that I was there. So it's been interesting navigating the two worlds of where there appears to be a commitment to diversity and where there just hasn't been diversity. Not necessarily that there was an interest in not being diverse, but just because that's not what the industry was. And you don't necessarily know what good looks like if you don't have other people coming to the mix. And so, for instance, in our industry and my particular company where I've been 3 years, everybody's father and grandfather and great-grandfather all worked there. And I say fathers because there were very few mothers that worked there. And so if you have a legacy company and you have a family company and industry, and you haven't had new people coming in with other ideas, there's less of an opportunity and a chance for it to be diverse. In the past 3 years, though, at our company, and the credit goes to our CEO, Mario Longhi, we have made phenomenal strides with respect to diversity. In my own legal department, we have improved diversity by more than 50% in 3 years. Now, that's pretty dramatic. And some people have said, well, how can you do that? Well, when you have an industry in crisis and a company in transformation, you have the opportunity to really make some very dramatic changes that might not be possible if you didn't have that particular situation. So when you're going through a transformation and you have layoffs, it creates the opportunity, because at the same time that you're laying off for market reasons and other transformation reasons, you're also looking, as our CEO says, to hire skills for the future. Well, in our mind, skills for the future do not come in one package. So we've used that opportunity to really go out and hire a more diverse workforce. Now, we have a long way to go. We've made great strides, but there's still a lot to be done. Just a couple of firsts. So I'm the first female general counsel. We have the first female head of corporate communications. We have the first female business leader. She runs consumer products. We actually have 2 business leaders because I also took on responsibility for one of our P&Ls for real estate. We had the first Asian American vice president ever, the first African American corporate secretary, and we have 3 female board members, 2 of whom also happen to be diverse board members. So, I mean, these are great strides in a 3-year period, and so we're quite proud. Now, again, we can't stop. We have a lot more to do, but we used the transformation opportunity as we went out to look for the skills for the future and the best and the bright to make sure that our slates of candidates, were diverse, and then we hired the best. Now, we also hired, a number of, bright white males. I certainly don't want to leave them out of the mix here as well. I mean, we were looking for the best candidates possible, and that represented a very diverse workforce, so I'm proud of that.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
That's tremendous. So you spoke to market dynamics, you spoke to the CEO starting at the top. Are there other change agents, either structurally or from a personnel and leadership perspective, that, because it's U.S. Steel, but it's also the steel industry at large. So assuming for a moment that the market dynamics are such that this is a good time to make changes that maybe would have been pushed harder against 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what other change agents can there be within the industry and at U.S. Steel, or maybe that have been at U.S. Steel, that have helped some of these dramatic changes, other than you in your role, no doubt?
Right. Well, I think it's also the recognition. I read an article recently that more than 50% of the population in America under the age of 5 is ethnically diverse. So think about that. In 20 years, that's the workforce that you're going to be, the pools that you're going to be drawing from to hire. So it's not just enough to be being a good corporate citizen is not enough of a reason to be committed to diversity. You also have to think about the business, ramifications and practicalities of it too. I mean, you want to be a good corporate citizen, but also look at the changing workforce. So that should be a driver within your corporations that, gosh, we want to make sure that we're well positioned so that when those, in 20 years from now, or sooner, when those young people come to apply for jobs, that they look at the workforce and they say, this is a place that I want to work. They don't look at it and say, oh my God, they haven't made any progress. It is daunting, as I'm sure many of you know, to walk into a place where you are the first. It is not that easy. Now, I have to say, I think that there are, and I've certainly had different experiences. There are experiences and places where you walk in and you're the first or the only in a category, and it's because they didn't necessarily want you there before. And there's other places like where I'm at now where I think they just hadn't had the opportunity. And because people hire in their own likenesses, and there's certain pools, and when you've been around forever, they're drawing from that same workforce. So I think that with respect to what other drivers, certainly within our industry, we hope our peers from our example will also make those changes as well. But I think, as a leader of a corporation, and certainly in an industry that has not been as diverse, you have to think about what does the future look like, and your company needs to look like that future.
In the interest of time, we still have a few more minutes. I'd like to ask you one more question and then pull that across as well for everyone else on the panel. So when we think about the great campaigns and initiatives and programs and leaders and boards that influence the diverse organizations we all hope to be leading and driving forward, is there a notion that it becomes self-perpetuating at some point, where the hard work that goes in lays a foundation that then is built upon with maybe less craft and deliberateness because the organization as it is now constructed is more diverse, and the assumption is that diversity will sustain? And maybe sort of a more specific question, how do we ensure that happens? I mean, in other words, there's decades to follow from us. What are some of the checks and balances that you see that can be put in place to help ensure that the programs that we're all working hard towards now live on for years to come?
Sure. Well, with respect to diversity in my company and industry, I look at it the same as our major challenge that we're facing on the business side, which is trade. We're looking for a level playing field in the global economic community with respect to trade. It's the same with diversity. We want a level playing field. We want to get to the day when We don't have to say, we're looking, do we have a female candidate on there? Do we have an African American or a Latino? We want to get to that point. It's certainly in our industry, it's a long way off. We've made great progress, but we want to get to the point where it is a level playing field for everybody. So what's it going to take? It's going to take every single person raising their hand, every single person, even when you think you don't have the opportunity to make a difference or make a change, you do. And Teresa and I were talking about this before real quick. We have 3 female members of our board, which is fantastic considering that we're a 116-year-old company in the industry we're in. I challenge all the other corporations out there that don't have that many women on the board to have it. If we can do it in our industry, then others should be doing it too. But the 3rd woman that joined the board, I had the opportunity, I saw the slate, and they were looking for someone with a very particular background. And I didn't see diversity on that slate, and I raised my hand and recommended this particular candidate. We can't be silent. We all have an obligation, and no matter what your position is within the company, you have the opportunity to have a voice. So I guess that's the challenge that I would give to everybody in this opportunity and here today, is that the opportunity is that you have the ability to make the change, and the change is not going to continue to happen and be sustainable like you're talking about unless everybody has a voice in it.
That's great. Kelly?
And I think I used the word before, it's an imperative. I just think it's essential. If companies and firms don't focus on D&I for the long term, they're not going to be successful. I mean, the talent, when you look at the talent pool and who's getting educated, and what it's going to look like in terms of the demographics in the years to come in this country in particular, you have to do it. And those who are going to win are going to figure it out faster, and those who are going to lose are going to sit on this issue. It's that simple. And so it's about focusing about getting those people into your organization, but it's equally and maybe more about having the right environment for them to thrive. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And it's interesting, sitting in this morning, I'm emailing with the women on that lead our women's organization at Visa, and the younger generations are not going to wait for us. They are pushing. They are pushing me. It's like we had International Women's Day. We had a great celebration. We all came together. We focused on the issues. It was global. It was terrific. And they're coming to me and saying, "Great, but we're not good enough yet. So what are we going to do about it?" And I love that we. They're not saying, "Kelly, what are you going to do about it?" It's what are we going to do about it? And we have to focus on it constantly. And we as senior executives in the organization need to make it at the top of our priorities, because our job is to make sure we take this company into the future. And frankly, our board expects for us to focus on it that way. So I think it's absolutely essential. And I think if you don't do it better than others, you will fail.
Great. Teresa?
I mean, I think if you're here in this venue, you probably already aspire to the values that we're articulating around why diversity is important. I do think that the how is important, and I completely agree with you. A lot of it is about the environment. I think that when I look at some of the instances where we recruited at UBS or at Treasury diverse candidates, and then you're all dressed up, and then the managerial skills may not be commensurate with being open-minded, not in a classical sense of discrimination, but basically the hiring manager was looking for a certain set of skills, and then the person that ultimately hired or was fit was not what they thought it should be. And I think that that's very disappointing. I guess the one thing that I've encouraged in all of my companies, as well as just a personal ethic, is we all as leaders have a responsibility to ask the other person, what can I do that would allow you to be more effective? And I think the old command and control of tops-down leadership, that is just gone, right? I mean, there's just not, that model's not going to work. And so I think when you think about a diverse workforce, people want to be appreciated for who they are. And they may not know exactly how they can contribute in some cases because they're new, you just recruited them. So I think that as a manager, as a leader, as a director, as a general counsel, I think asking people what you could do that is work-related, task at hand, but would change something that you could do that would make them be more successful. I think that's a very welcoming statement, and I also think it helps the end cause that all of us have around increasing diversity, but also increasing the effectiveness and the success of the company, because that's going to make everybody feel great.
That's great. Well, I don't want to take more time because I know we're off schedule, but thank all three of you for taking the time today, and it's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, Preston.
Great.